So, hi, and welcome to our panel on giving and getting help for RUOK Day, presented as a part of Support Acts on My Mind series and co hosted by Music Victoria, Q Music, and APRA. Thanks to the Australian Government through the Office of the Arts. Thanks to the American Express Music Bankers Program. Shout out to the Support Act Wellbeing Helpline, a 24/7 service for people in the music industry to help with mental health and well-being. Support Act, of course, is dedicated to supporting the mental health and well-being of the Australian music industry, including crew, musicians, and music workers. My name is Max Quinn. Hello. We have so much to talk about today, but before we get stuck in, I think it is important to acknowledge the First Nations people of this country, the lands on which we're gathered. So I'd like to invite Carissa Grant from Support Act to make the acknowledgement of country this afternoon. Hi, Carissa.
Oh, hey Max, thank you. Hey everyone, and welcome to today's discussion for Are You OK Day. I would like to pay my respects to the 500 tribes in Australia today, First Nations tribes in Australia today. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and future, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I'd also like to acknowledge all First Nations people who attend today. I'm a proud Gurindji, Warlpiri and Jawoyn woman from Katherine, Northern Territory, and I come to you today on Wurundjeri land. Thank you.
Always was, always will be. All right. Are You OK Day? Giving and getting help. Let's talk about it. So, hello, my name is Max Quinn. I've been at Triple J for maybe 10 years behind the scenes, on air, around the traps. I'm a musician, a writer. I also have depression. Mental health is a big part of my journey as someone working in the music industry. And I feel very fortunate to be here talking with you on a day that I have a lot of complex feelings about. And I'm thinking this might actually be a good time to say that this is probably going to be a pretty candid conversation. Sometimes I wonder if the language that we use to talk about mental health can actually be a bit of a barrier to entry for having an actual productive conversation about mental health. So, what I want to try to do today is speak really plainly about this. And for that reason, maybe this might feel a little bit uncomfortable for you, a bit weird. And I just wanted to flag that, firstly, you're under no obligation to stay on the Zoom call if you do start to feel your own mental health stuff bubbling away here. I might even give you just a couple of seconds now to think about how you're feeling, decide whether this is something that you feel okay about going through. I'm just going to count to 5, no pressure. Maybe I will see you on the other side to get nice and specific about mental health and giving and receiving support today. Okay, so I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, let's start here. I dread Are You OK Day. Can I just say that up the top? Like, I want to couch this discussion in the idea that this is a fundamentally weird thing to be doing. Like, as someone with depression, the irony is not lost on me that today is like our state mandated depression Christmas. And in and of itself, that is an idea that makes me so depressed, because I think that mental health is a conversation that needs to be ongoing and specific, and rather than like generalized and on a designated day. So over the next hour, I think what we really want to achieve, and this is also, I think, where the value of a day like Are You OK Day really lies, is in giving you the skills to be able to facilitate those ongoing and specific conversations about mental health, because it's really important. And if I can shut up for long enough, we'll also have time for questions at the end. To help us get there, Ash King is here. Ash is a provisional psychologist who has lots of music industry experience. She works with the Indigo Project, finding creative answers to questions about mental health. Hi, Ash.
Hey Max, nice to be here with you today.
Brendon Love is here too. Brendon plays bass in the Teskey Brothers. He's someone who has been on his own mental health journey in the past 12 months. I'm thankful that Brendon is here to share with us, and I'm excited to talk about what that's been like. Hi, Brendon.
Hey Max, and hello everybody watching.
Also joining us is Fanny Lumsden. Fanny is a solo artist with a stack of incredible songs to her name. She writes about self-care and is passionate about mental health and outreach in regional Australia. G'day, Fanny.
G'day,
And a big
how you
hi
going?
too. So good. Big hi to Cerisa Grant. Cerisa brings a wealth of experience as support acts, First Nations community engagement social worker. Cerisa, welcome. So, giving and getting help. Ash, I might ask you to share your screen as we work through the slides that we've prepared for this session. The way that this will work is Ash is going to speak to the many different aspects of giving and getting help from her perspective as a provisional psychologist. And then we'll stop down at the end of each slide for discussion. If you have questions, I don't know, is there a raise hand button that you guys can click on? Do you have that option? Maybe not. Yes? Great. Okay. Maybe you can raise your hand if you, thank you for doing that. You can do that. And if you've got your hand up, we'll come to you at the end as we're doing questions. Ash, let's start with this. Do you want to share your screen and talk to us about what might indicate to you that someone isn't doing too well with their mental health and what we can look out for?
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone. And I'm really excited to be taking you through a little bit of a journey today in terms of how we can offer support to people who might need it, as well as how we might be able to ask for support when we recognize that we're struggling. So what to expect from today's presentation is a few signs that you or a mate might not be doing so well. And we're going to be touching on why we sometimes find it icky, uncomfortable, uncool to ask for help, to give help and receive help, because I think that's a really important point that we don't often discuss. Also, this whole idea of asking, are you okay, can again feel really awkward or really forced. So there's a few different ways that we can cover these questions. And then when you ask someone, are you okay, what then? So how can you be a good support for someone who might be struggling? And then how to sort of empower and take action and get help if you need it, or you want to try and help empower somebody else too. So I really just want to caveat that a lot of the points that I'll be making and exploring today are grounded in sort of Western scientific research on sort of largely white populations. So there is incredible variance when it comes to these issues, cultural variance. So please don't think that it's a one size fits all model. I'm just, reading through the research papers and trying to make things a little bit more sexy and accessible. But there's a lot of different ways to answer these questions and to confront a lot of these issues. So, feel free to sort of think about your own lived experience, the people that you know, and how things might be shifted or changed in order to be made a little bit more appropriate. Okay, so let's kick off with signs that you or a mate might not be doing great. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive list here, but they are the ones that we have seen time and time again coming up in the therapy rooms, coming up in the research that show that someone may be struggling. So the first one is kind of acting off, like not really acting yourself, fairly agitated or erratic, maybe feeling really overwhelmed, particularly aggressive or withdrawn. Things like using substances, drinking, smoking, or using drugs a lot more frequently, and kind of not really being able to get through your day-to-day without relying on these things. Another thing to look out for is isolation. So when people start to pull back from existing in social spaces, not coming to parties, not going out. I know this one is tricky given the context of the world right now, but maybe someone that you haven't heard from, that you used to hear from quite frequently, it's kind of not hitting you up as often. So little things like that you can kind of keep an eye on. Another thing is sort of pulling back from doing fun or healthy stuff, things like hobbies, exercise, stuff that used to bring you or them joy, or that are pretty good for you, like sort of eating a healthy diet or exercising. one that we can't look past as well is a big life blow. So something heavy has gone down. Perhaps you've lost a friend or a family member, broken up with a partner, lost a job, maybe you've lost money. Sort of your living situation has changed. So lots of those different things that can show up for us in our lives, and they're often unavoidable. Eating and sleeping patterns are also a really good one when we can notice a big shift in those. So often it's maybe eating way too often or not enough, and the same goes with sleeping too. This is a new one, I guess, given the new social context that we kind of share parts of ourselves online. But if you start maybe posting dark or alarming content onto social media, or seeing some mates doing that too, certain behaviors might take on an obsessive, all-encompassing vibe. Things like watching porn or having sex, but also things that we might associate with sort of being high functioning, like exercising or working heaps. So, you know, when we start to become obsessive and sort of can't sort of disconnect ourselves from those behaviors. Another one is engaging in risky behaviors. So drink driving, speeding, driving drunk or high, gambling, taking heavier drugs, having heaps of unprotected sex, getting into fights. And finally, if you're thinking that suicide is something that's coming up a lot, maybe something that's being brought up, or thinking about self-harm, so that is also something that's definitely worth seeing as a sign that things might be not going great. I'll also make a point here that it's worth keeping a close eye on mates who tend to be impulsive in their behaviours, just because it can put them at added risk here too.
Do you think that people who are inclined to behave impulsively are more likely to scientifically, psychologically, whatever it is, be inclined to encounter mental health difficulties?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. I'm not sure that I've read enough of the research to be able to speak to that, but we do know that people who are impulsive are more likely to sort of follow through on suicidal ideation.
Mm-hmm.
And as well as sort of, I guess, follow through in sort of any type of riskier behaviour. So yeah, they do need to be sort of just kept a close eye on.
I want to start by asking if anyone on the panel recognizes these kind of behaviors or has seen these things manifest themselves or in a friend that they know, and what happened and what you did about that. Brendon, are you comfortable talking about what you've been through?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as these come up, certainly seeing things that relate to me and people I know as well. I mean, for me, the biggest one is, the isolation thing, not attending social events and cancelling plans. And some friends on the fringes often, would take that as, oh, bloody Brendon, get disappointed. But luckily I've got very close friends that understand these signs. And so, that was a big part of me getting help as well, was just my close friends sort of recognizing, hang on, mate, like another party or, another thing like that. Even just the other day, my best friend, was calling me a bit. I was screening his calls, and, he knows that I can be a bit like that, but he just sent me a message and just said, hey, just checking you're okay. And,
yeah,
and I was okay, but I was having a bit of a down day. And then through that conversation, we just started to go, yeah, sorry, mate, actually, I am feeling a bit crap. So
these things are going on. This is what's happening. And those are kind of like important fundamental relationships to have. And I think that, for me, I think a lot about like the shrinking circle of options when it feels like you're not doing great. It almost feels like your options are decreasing as you maybe see more of these signs manifest in and of yourself and of your own behavior. I relate to so many of these things in having gone through mental health experiences of my own. I feel pretty good at the moment, and I'm pretty lucky to be in that place. But there was a time in my life where I moved cities. I was in a bad relationship. I was exactly all of this stuff. I was drinking more. I was isolating, the whole thing. And like when you like, it's almost not until you see the list of the things that it really manifests and that you come to understand, I think, the extent to which that you might be in a bit of a hole here. And when it comes to, when it comes to having that realization, the fallout can be pretty immense, and I think that particularly people in the creative industries and working in music, maybe we're a little bit more prone to the bottom falling out, because so much of what we do is predicated on turning our financial or our creative input into our financial income. And that's such a murky porridge of identity and commerce and creativity that I like. It's a thing that I find to be unique to the creative industries.
I think it's definitely worth raising that a lot of these behaviors are sort of self-medicating behaviors. So people do them because in the moment it makes you feel better. But what happens is, and just like you said, sort of with the bottom falling out, these behaviors, when done continuously and sort of relied on, do tend to sort of help scratch out the ground beneath you, so that you've got nothing stable left to hold on to. And you just keep going back and back and back to them because you're like, okay, well, for the moment, they're making me feel okay, but they're really not offering any type of support or helping build that resilience so that you are able to sort of get out of that hole and bring yourself out of maybe a really dark place.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we move on?
I'd like just...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I just want to quickly just say that with that first point, like constantly agitated, erratic, overwhelmed, I feel like that, just recently I've been like, I noticed myself, feeling like that quite a lot. And mostly because, I have like, different levels of anxiety around and performing and stuff, but mostly because I haven't been performing and then learning to recognize that, like, I haven't been on stage, I haven't been getting those kicks that I get every week. And I'm not getting that feedback. And that might, like, for someone who doesn't usually associate, like, I'm not someone that has had huge amounts of experience personally with, depression and that kind of stuff. It wasn't something that I was willing to recognize. But yeah, it's like, it doesn't need to be, it could be something quite, I suppose, like, just came on quite quickly, and learning to recognize those triggers. And it doesn't need to be something that you have to be like, oh, okay. I think what I'm trying to say is, like, it's quite hard to admit to yourself what it is, and it might not be, you might not have all of those things, but it might be something quite small.
I think that's a really good point. Like, especially thinking about the incremental nature that depression takes versus the way that it is presented in media and the way that we talk about it generally. I want to make the point that depression isn't just like fucking full-blown depression. Depression isn't just not being able to get out of bed one day and waking up and feeling terrible about yourself. It's, some of these things manifesting in ways that affect your life and affect your well-being. And I think that that's sort of like, it goes overlooked because obviously, mental health is a conversation that we need to keep having, and that is, I will say, like, there's so many unknowns with mental health because it does vary so significantly from person to person. But because of that, it's kind of this fun exercise that we get to do where it's sort of like, what are we doing? How do I unpick my own stitches to a certain extent and understand that my little things are still significant, and that they still mean the same as someone else's, or whatever is presented as in the media as depression or mental health difficulty or whatever it happens to be.
100%. Yeah, well said.
Let's talk about why we struggle.
Let's do it. And you know what, this one is actually really personal to me, because when I was sort of going through my darkest period, I was working in the music industry for about 8 years full time as a singer, and I had an accident with my voice. I couldn't work anymore. I found myself doing a lot of those behaviors on that other page, particularly isolating. But the idea that I needed help, or that I should ask for help, was something that was really, really difficult for me to admit. And I think that it goes the same way with a lot of people, as well as us feeling, you know, like I'm a therapist and sometimes I feel, you know, awkward offering support to someone because we have all of these hang-ups. So I'd like to speak to a couple of those, particularly this idea that asking for help or expressing emotions is a sign of weakness or deficiency. This is something that a lot of us were brought up with and continue to hold very closely to our identities, even if we can rationally understand, you know, no, asking for help doesn't make you weak, or feeling feelings doesn't make you weak. It's different because it's an emotional response that we have that's been conditioned over years and years of reinforcement from maybe family members, maybe friends, and definitely by society. Another one is we don't want to be a burden. So we think, shit, you know, these people that I love in my life, they've got their own stuff happening. You know, they've got kids to look after, they've got lives to lead, they've got jobs to do. I don't want to make them feel responsible for me or to be an extra burden on them. Or even like the idea of being a downer. I also hated that. I was like, I don't want to go to a party because I'm just going to be this, you know, sad sack and no one's going to want to vibe with me because I don't want to talk about anything except for how shit I'm feeling, pretty much. Another point is that we're uncomfortable around our own and other people's big, messy emotions. And I think this is linked to the first point, is that, you know, we're not really ever taught how to be with our emotions. We're not really taught what our emotions mean. And often we're taught to just like get the fuck rid of them because they're not for public consumption. You know, they're not something that we should put on a show unless, you know, we're expressing our emotions through art or, you know, in some sort of well-packaged, you know, nice and tidy unit. If it's just a raw emotion that's coming out, we tend to feel quite uncomfortable around it, with our own and with other people's. Another good point is that we want to be able to fix things. You know, we're people, we're human beings, we're problem solvers, and we're worried if we ask the question, are you okay? And the other person isn't okay, or we admit, oh, you know, I do need help, but I don't want to admit that I can't fix myself. It makes us feel worse sometimes. We feel shit when we can't fix our own problems or fix somebody else's. And again, we're afraid of saying the wrong thing. We think, oh, I'm not going to bring up that really devastating thing that my friend went through because I don't want to make it worse, or I don't want to make them think about it. So we are very delicate around these type of issues because for the most part, we just really don't know what to do with them. But I do want to say that, you know, all these types of discomfort are completely normal. They're completely natural. But hopefully, the more that we learn about this stuff and the more that we discuss today, we'll learn that this discomfort shouldn't be enough to hold you back for reaching out for help for yourself, or maybe to offer help for someone else.
This is one of the big things that I feel like I've learned over the years is that, like, when I'm uncomfortable, I'm like, oh, something's happening, you know, like that feeling of being like, okay, being in tune with what's happening and thinking about why you feel what you feel. Fanny, you're someone who has declared a war on pride in one of your songs. I want to talk to you about that, and particularly in the context of regional Australia and the work that you do on tour in seeing so much of this country and talking to women and also men about what they're feeling and why they're feeling it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Western New South Wales on a farm in a regional community, and I think that first point about we're taught not like that expressing signs, it's a sign of weakness when you're asking for help. It couldn't ring more true. It is like stamped. And even though I am here understanding and trying to talk about it, I still recognize it in myself. I'm still acting that out. And sometimes I think it's even like, it's not that we feel like, well, I am capable of getting myself through this, but it's like, you don't have to, like, you don't have to struggle through this. And I feel like that is the thing that I struggle with most. I was like, I could do it. I can get through this. I'll be right. but I don't have to struggle like that. And I think it was recognizing that. But yes, back to what you said is, so we tour around on where we go to regional communities a lot. And I wrote this song because I'd recognized in myself, in my family, in my friends, in people that I was meeting all the time, this inability and this block of talking, even talking about positive emotions. It's not just negative emotions. It's even like telling people that they love each other, like that kind of thing was stopped by this weird kind of pride and shame mixed in together. And so I found that kind of interesting to look into. And when we did a film clip for this song, Real Men Don't Cry, War and Pride, we went around and we talked to the people that we filmed, and we asked them how they felt about crying in public, and how they felt about talking to their mates about how they were feeling. And a lot of them, it was just like there wasn't even an option, like they absolutely wouldn't. And we spoke to this one amazing guy who lives out in Western Queensland, and he'd just lost his dad to cancer and inherited an enormous property out there that was strictly in drought, and he was 28 years old, and like the amount of pressure on his shoulders was just absolutely insane. And he told us that he hadn't cried yet, and he admitted that he hadn't cried throughout the whole process. So, it was really moving. But I think it is such an important thing to obviously keep talking about. And there's a moment in the show, I'll sing the song, we talk about how it's important to open up, to share, and then we kind of provide resources as well, phone numbers and different things. But I try not to really dwell on it in the show, but just bring it up and have it as a thing that maybe they can come back to later on. But yeah.
For sure. You think about pride being something, and you also mentioned shame. Those two emotions I find are so strongly linked together. Cerisa, I'm wondering how this manifests in the communities of First Nations Australians, and pride and shame as they relate to mental health. Are you able to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So I know with a lot of Indigenous communities, they don't feel comfortable in reaching out for help purely because the stigma that comes with being an Indigenous person, the racism behind that. So a lot of people don't reach out because they don't feel like they can connect to a non-Indigenous person. Which is why it's great to have an Indigenous person always representing within an organisation, so that they feel a lot more comfortable approaching.
Yeah, and that's part of the work that you do with Support Act, right? Can you talk a little bit about what you do?
So Support Act, I'm a community engagement and / social worker, and we just put up on the Support Act website a dedicated First Nations support line. So these with this, it brings a cultural awareness into that support line. So for Indigenous people who do want to access this line, they can speak to an Indigenous counsellor or a person who has cultural awareness, and they'll be able to express themselves a lot better and experience, I guess, a better counselling session within that.
Increasing that level of comfort.
Yeah, increasing it a lot, because there's so much stigma around that, and actually the suicide rate is double that of the Australian population in the Indigenous communities. So, and we're only 3% of the Australian population, and we make up 50% of the suicide rate. So to have this Support Act dedicated support line is hugely significant, especially within the music industry.
Yeah, particularly as we're seeing so many incredible young role models come through the Australian music industry for First Nations peoples. I wanted to touch just quickly on a couple of the questions in the Q&A. One that I saw here, and in fact, I may have told you to put your hand up in the chat before. I think a better way to do it, now realizing that this Q&A function exists, is to pop your question in the Q&A if you have one. Someone says, how can I best support a relative living with me who is not doing well without annoying them? I think that's a really interesting question to talk about when we're talking about why we struggle with help and giving it. Ash, do you have any advice?
Yeah, actually, that's one of the points that we'll be coming up to. So being able to have the conversations, I guess, without making it all about like, oh, is there something wrong with you? And
Yeah.
What do you need me to do? So we'll be going into that a little bit deeper just really soon.
Great. And I feel like the other question that's popped up here is, what is the best way to help someone who has attempted suicide? I think that might be something that we have coming up as well, as it turns, to helping people and giving that support that we want to give. The other thing I just wanted to touch on, these big, messy emotions, man, like this is the nuts and bolts of it for me, where it's like not only do you have to learn to regulate your emotions, you also kind of have to find out what they mean and what's informing them. And sometimes those things aren't necessarily things that you feel like you want to look into, but I think that human growth is dependent, and particularly for mental health, working through, it's like kneading dough of your own, I don't know, happiness, of your own sense of well-being. Yeah, exactly, right. You're doing like a literal emotional exercise, and yeah, those big messy ones are often, I find, the ones that are end up being the most rewarding to work through.
Yeah, they're often the ones that are most closely linked with feelings of guilt and shame and pride. So it's interesting that you brought that up earlier, because not only do we feel the feeling, but we feel the shame of feeling the feeling. We feel the guilt of feeling the feeling. Basically, we're just doubling up on, self-punishment for the most, because we don't know how to stop ourselves from feeling, and then we feel bad to do that. Yeah.
Feel bad about feeling bad.
Yeah.
100%. Kua in the chat says, if you have identified someone who thinks that mental health is a weakness, what is the best way to help that person open up?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. I think, I guess, like modeling behavior and maybe showing sort of within yourself that, that's maybe not a point that you completely agree with, and that the ways that you have been able to learn about your own mental health and talk about your own mental health have helped you in positive and inspiring ways. I don't think that you can ever really tell someone how to believe about anything, and people will believe what they want to believe for the time that they believe it, if that makes sense. There's things that happen in our lives that help to sort of maybe start to take our ideas or beliefs in different directions, but I don't think that you can just tell someone, well, that's not true, or, you should think differently. So I think validating how somebody feels and thinks about things, but also, offering an alternative perspective and off your own lived experience. No one can argue with that.
I absolutely, I agree so much with what you're saying. And the thing about it that I think about is the importance of being specific with that kind of stuff, and in modeling behavior. It's that radical candor of giving people an example to sort of like model their own behavior off, or to understand. And I think that putting it on someone that, hey, we can talk about this, and guess what, I'm going to, is so much of the way to lead the way, I have found with, friends who I've had who have felt the same way. Let's talk about how to ask, are you okay, in your own way?
Yeah, so
are you okay? Add in that. Sorry, can I just quickly add in there before we move on from why people struggle to ask for mental health? I think there's also like a comparison thing. So like, you're like, oh, my issues aren't as bad as that person's issues. So like, I don't really have a right or a place to, like, what am I going to talk to someone about? Like, my issues are fine. I have a really nice life, or whatever else. And I think that that's a huge block. Like, I can totally speak from my own experience in that. Like, I'm like, well, I haven't lost somebody, or I haven't gone through this thing. So yeah, so I feel like that is a definite, it definitely blocks people from asking for help as well.
Yeah, and this comparison has just popped up in the chat. Someone says, I struggle with comparing myself to people who function well and don't seem to have the same mental issues. I feel less or inferior. It's hard to allow yourself to have time out because of the shame of not functioning. And I think that, I don't know who you are or what your journey is, but you're halfway there, like, look at you acknowledging the shame and understanding the emotion that you're feeling. And then like,
Well, being here with us today. Just
right,
the fact
100%. Yeah. This being the exact thing where like, this is like, this is kind of how you put yourself and how you level yourself and level the playing field for yourself by going, okay, cool. This is what I'm dealing with. This is how it feels. And once you're like, it's that radical acceptance of like who you are and understanding why. And I feel like at that point, the rest of it, you know, over time being the great healer, it melts away.
Yep. Awesome point, Fanny. Thanks for sharing that as well about the social comparison. It's what we do as human beings, and it's difficult to train our way out of it because it's something that we've evolved with, this idea of looking at how everyone else is doing and then, you know, how are we doing in comparison. Often those of us who tend to suffer more from anxiety and depression do tend to look at everyone who's doing better and compare ourselves against those people, and it makes us feel a whole lot worse because we're like, well, we're doing like absolute shit. But you can kind of also learn the practice of sort of comparing yourself to people who maybe are struggling more, and realizing that, you know, your struggles are valid regardless of where they're positioned in terms of, you know, society deemed importance, you know. So definitely a really great point. But let's press on and chat about different ways that you can ask, are you okay? Because sometimes are you okay doesn't cut the mustard. Sometimes if you ask someone, are you okay? They're like, yeah, end of conversation. Great. So as a practitioner, one thing that we always learn is to ask open-ended questions. Something like, you know, I've noticed you haven't seemed like yourself lately, shows that someone is, you know, on your mind, and that you've noticed a change. So you obviously have to care and be invested enough in your friendship or in your connection to notice something like that. And you leave it open to say, how's everything been going? How are you really is another good one too. You know, a little spin on the old classic. You know, you can't just respond with a, you know, fine or not bad. You want to dig a little bit deeper, and a question like that kind of prompts them to say, you know what, I'm here and I'm happy to hear it. You know, the good, the bad, the ugly, just like lay it on me. This one's also great too because it acknowledges if someone has been struggling through something, you're not trying to dismiss it or not leave it acknowledged. I think that sometimes when people have had really difficult experiences, you know, maybe they've lost a job or they've lost a loved one, they've broken up with a partner, we're like, oh, I don't want to bring that up because that's like awkward. You know, I don't want to make them think about it. It's like, dude, they're thinking about it. They're living it. That's their life. So you can acknowledge, you know, maybe if you don't want to acknowledge it directly, you can say, I know that things have been hard, and how are you feeling? You know, speak to their feelings, allow them to open up. You can just give them the option to discuss whatever they want to talk about, you know, with the proviso that nothing's too big or too small. You can also say that you're feeling worried about them and letting them know that you're there for them and happy to chat, you know, about whatever it is they want to chat about, or also acknowledging that maybe you're not the best person, or maybe you're not the person that they feel the most comfortable talking to. So giving them the permission, you know, opening up the floor, saying, is there someone else that you might prefer to talk to about this stuff? You know, if you can, help connect them with someone like that. And another thing that's really important is check-ins. You know, if there's someone that you're worrying about, maybe they're not opening up, maybe they're not comfortable opening up yet, and that's okay. But you can say, look, you know, I'm worried about you. I'm going to check in with you next week. Is that okay? And you can call me whenever you want. So, you know, maybe you're not cool to chat now, but give me a call, you know, and whenever you feel like you're ready, I'll be here for you. So again, it's really important, these open-ended questions use words like how and what, so that people, you know, aren't restricted into responding with like yes and no's. You're opening the floor and you're encouraging sort of a discussion, you're encouraging a sharing.
And I think we have a nature as people, particularly, you know, dealing with and not having all of this experience with these big messy emotions that you describe, we kind of inclined to duck and weave, right? Like, and for me, what I find the most helpful when I'm dealing with stuff is when people come to me and say, how are you going with this? And they say this, and they say what the thing is, and there's no escaping that, and it's not a methodology that works for everyone, but it's one that I definitely found worked for me, and that for my friends who I feel comfortable enough that that's a methodology that it works for. That's something that I really like to employ. Brendon, when you were struggling with all of this that you went through for the first time, how did your friends react? How did your bandmates react? And what were the sort of questions that they were asking you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I'm sort of the poster child for what we were talking about before with, shame and everything's fine and just trying to ignore it as much as possible and keep the ball rolling. And so I would hide it as well, which is a terrible thing to do. And part of that is the shame, but I think it's also when I got to my lowest point, there was a feeling of that I don't even deserve help.
Yeah.
So that was a really difficult thing to sort of work through. And so, yeah, I really just sort of, ticked all the boxes for the cliches of, avoiding help and not recognizing I needed help and having too much pride to let myself understand I needed help. And yeah, and like, I guess, the initial sort of conversation starts out very much like some of these statements here. And like you were saying, Max, just like the complete upfront, okay, what's going on with this? And then having, basically having to talk about it, I think was a really good way for me to start because I couldn't avoid it anymore. But I was just going to say also, I think like with my sort of journey with it, it's at a point now where if I'm on tour or something, like my friends and my band and my whole crew are sort of aware enough of what I'm going through to where they touch base enough so that it's sometimes it can be, hey, how are you going today? Or sometimes like Liam, our drummer, he's perceptive enough to sort of recognize that, okay, Brendon's on tour, he's feeling a bit anxious, he's homesick and all of these things. And so sometimes he'll even just go, hey, do you want to get a coffee? And so it's not that confronting, let's talk about it right now, but he'll just go, hey, do you want to get a coffee? And offers a certain type of sympathetic company. And through that, then the conversation starts as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky that I'm surrounded by people that I guess have an understanding to that point where they can recognize it in me.
And Fanny, what about in regional communities? Are there different ways that you have found to ask, are you okay?
Yeah, I think all of the, more official language around mental health is not, like I've found not to be particularly helpful, in terms of starting conversation with people. So yeah, it's just like kind of getting that rapport. And then I suppose it's almost just kind of like standing next to somebody and just being there, whether that's physically or like you're saying online, and then just allowing that comfort for somebody to open up. So yeah, I feel like when the work, the kind of more jargon kind of words are used, it has the opposite effect. So I suppose you're just asking how maybe something specific is going, maybe on the farm, and leading with different conversations and opening those things up with other avenues.
Yeah, and part of the reason why I said at the top here that this is a day that I struggle with is because like I don't want fuckos coming out of the woodwork to ask me whether I'm good or not. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm fine to talk about this anytime you want, but like let's go and actually talk about it rather than, you messaging me out of the blue on a designated day to say, hey bud, what's up? Like I feel like there are degrees to which the worst thing that you could ask me today would be whether or not I'm okay, depending on who you are. And to that end, I do wonder if part of this is making sure that you're doing this next week as well. Like we talk about this being Depression Christmas, but like every day can be Christmas for you is what I'm trying to say here. How can we be a good listener? Ash?
Yeah, so this leads on to maybe respond to some of the questions that have been asked in terms of how we have these conversations. Some really great points from all of you guys as well, like the fact that we can start these conversations a lot of the time without, you know, making it so direct about like, is there something wrong with you? Like, what's going on? You know, we can just be like, hey, do you want to go for a walk? Hey, do you want to come hang out? And sort of you being the one who initiates, you know, just something, just some sort of connection. So I think the first thing that I have to speak to is really taking care of yourself. I know that some people have this idea of wanting to be this over giver, this someone who's constantly there and supporting and saving and rescuing others. But from what we've found in the research, you know, you have to take care of yourself if you want to take care of others. You know, the whole like fitting your own oxygen mask before you can, you know, save anyone else. So you really do need to be spending that time working on yourself, taking care of yourself, if you want to be able to be there and support someone else. Now, another one, and this is kind of what we were chatting to already, pick a good moment, somewhere you both feel comfortable. And again, you know, like find your moment to ask these questions, somewhere where they're going to feel good, maybe somewhere that's private, maybe somewhere that they don't feel like they're being looked at or being judged. Also, you know, read the room and know your mates, like know the people around you and what type of people they are. And maybe, you know, try to ask things differently and see how you might be able to get some different responses, because we're all so different. You know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, ask this in this way at this place and you'll get the answers that you need. You know, it doesn't work that way. Okay, so the next point is, and again, this is just what Fanny said, be ready to listen deeply and attentively. In the therapy space, we call this holding space for someone. That is, we don't make it about us. We just allow ourselves to be there and be present and bear witness to the experience and feelings of someone else. Often you can rephrase what they've said in your own words, and that shows that you're listening to them and you're making a real effort to understand. So that shows that you're engaged with what they've got to say. And another point is to validate their feelings and experiences. With phrases like that sounds really hard, and it's normal to feel like that. You know, if you know that's what you've gone through, it's totally normal. A lot of the time we get confused about validation. Maybe that's, you know, validating someone who's upset. Is that going to make them think that, you know, like they should be more upset? You know, no, they're going to feel however they're going to feel. And we need to unlearn shame about feeling. And that only happens when our feelings are met with validation and acceptance, because feeling is natural and human and sometimes messy and uncomfortable, but we got to sit with it. It's not going anywhere. You know, we've evolved over, you know, 200,000 years with these things. They're sticking around. Now, if you want, you can also encourage them to explore and expand on their feelings. Like, you know, how does that feel for you? Or how long have you been feeling like this? You know, stick with the feelings as opposed to getting scared and running away from them, saying, oh, it's messy, it's gross, I don't know what to do with this. Another one is don't minimize, judge, or jump to advice giving and problem solving mode. This is probably the most important one. We want to make everything better. If we love them, we don't want them to be hurting. We don't want them to be suffering. We don't want them to be in pain. But you know what? What you want for them isn't going to necessarily instantly come true because you tell them, well, you know, you should do more yoga and have a green smoothie. You need to understand that feelings of sadness and feelings, you know, of anger, feelings of loss are completely natural and human, and you don't want to minimize that, and you don't want to judge them for feeling that way. So, you know, kind of check yourself. We can do this to ourselves as well. We can feel and then we like minimize it. We're like, oh no, but it's not that bad. You know, I've got a roof over my head. You know, sometimes those things do help for people to say that to themselves, but other times, you know what, you just have to be like, yeah, I feel like fucking shit right now. And like, finally, I guess, like, be prepared that they might not be okay and they might not want to talk and that you can't fix everything for them. So just by having these conversations and just by being a good listener, it's not the answer to everyone's problems, you know, and we need to prepare ourselves that we might not have the solutions to all their problems, and most people don't expect you to either. Finally, and I think the most important one is check in on them, stay in touch, just let them know that you're there. And that's a really, really powerful point.
Advice giving and problem solving are my worst traits, I think. They're the things that I'm such a little diplomat when it comes to that sort. Like, my partner will be like, I'm going through this, and I'm like, well, here's what you should do about it. And it's just the worst thing that I do. But I completely take your point that, like, people are going to feel the way that they're going to feel. People like what they like. These are like fundamental rules of being a person, I guess. But certainly the way that I want to feel when I'm feeling bad is validated, and feeling like, oh, cool, I just want to feel like someone's listening to me. And that's half the battle, at least in my personal experience. Cerisa, I know you do a lot of work as a social worker and have worked through a lot of this kind of stuff. What have you learned about the importance of active listening and being there in these kinds of moments?
Yeah, it's good with active listening for an Indigenous person, because a lot of them aren't aware of the issues that they have, and a big issue within the Indigenous community is intergenerational trauma. So that's like passed down from the history of Australia. Many people may not know it because unfortunately it's not taught in schools, but the reality was the Indigenous people suffered a lot of genocide and rape and murder, and that's being passed down from generation to generation. And the reason why mental health is so huge within the community is because of that trauma. And so I think if you do want to ever approach an Indigenous person, I'm just looking at the questions over here as well, it's always good to understand the history and what happened previously. It's always good to understand what type of culture there is, because there's different kind of cultures within the Indigenous community. And also in Indigenous communities, like culturally, men speak to men and women speak to women. So, I mean, that's how you would approach someone. But yeah, understanding the Indigenous background, the true history of Australia, is really great if people can do their research before approaching an Indigenous person. And yeah, really listening and not judging them, because we already feel completely judged.
Where would you suggest people start if they would like to learn more about the history that you speak about?
So a good documentary is called oh gosh, I'll have to look it up. I think it's Citizen, Australian Citizen.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
if you want to confirm for us and pop in the chat.
Yeah, I will. I'll put the link in the chat, but that's
Excellent.
a really good, fun documentary, and it teaches about the history, and yeah, it's a great one.
Thank you so much. How can we help people take action? How can we empower people, get and give support? We saw some questions pop up in the Q&A about this earlier. I feel like this might be one of those ones that we can address now.
Yeah, for sure. So something that can be helpful on the get-go is considering how tough obstacles have been overcome in the past. So I guess helping yourself or helping someone else recognize the difficult things that they've passed through, that they've moved through, that they've survived, and acknowledging, you can do hard things, we can do hard things. Life isn't about avoiding the difficult stuff. It's about understanding that we have what it takes to make it through. And sort of then thinking, back to those times that were difficult, what things did you do to help make it through? there's potential for people to bring up some of those behaviors that we touched on earlier that, you know, aren't particularly supportive to the self. But it's likely that if there was something that was really difficult, that they were able to move through, that there were some supportive behaviors, actions, there were things that they did that enabled them to overcome the obstacles and to sort of move through those challenges. Another thing that's really useful is sort of healthy ways of soothing or nurturing. Again, you know, moving away from a lot of those ones that can be a little bit harmful or dangerous to us, and finding things that sort of make you feel better or help you have fun that can really support you. And sometimes, you know, especially if you're quite depressed, you've really lost touch with a lot of these things. You've cut yourself off from them, and you're not really enjoying anything. So exploring maybe things from your past, even things from your childhood that will find things that you can do in a playful way that, you know, there's not a lot of high stakes involved. And I think that's an interesting thing when we talk to people from the arts communities, is that, you know, a lot of artists, a lot of people who have, you know, now got a career in the arts have taken something that used to be done because it just gave them joy, and now it's their job. And so I think it's very important for people who do work in creative and arts industries to have other outlets to express themselves and to enjoy themselves, things that they're not always thinking, oh, how can this be monetized, or is anyone gonna, you know, like stream this or buy this record, you know, that type of thing. So another one is, you know, sometimes you're just going to ask, you know, how can I help? Or you can see maybe where in their life they might need some assistance and support, and go ahead. So some people have said that it, you know, it's really helpful when someone goes, oh, you know, I've been really overwhelmed and haven't been able to, you know, prepare my meals or, you know, feed my kids or something. And someone goes, oh, well, you know, well, I'm coming over tonight and I'm going to bring you some cooked meals, or I'll come over and cook dinner for you. So, you know, often people are overloaded with thoughts and feelings, and sometimes they don't even know how you can help. So if you can see some place where you can bring part of yourself and you can help out, then that's often really invaluable too. And you can also see how you might be able to help them connect with a mental health professional or some relevant resources. This can sometimes be a bit of a, you know, an awkward one to bring up, I guess, because, you know, people think, oh God, they're going to think that, like, I think that they're crazy, or, you know, they need to have therapy. And there's still so much stigma attached to getting support from mental health professionals. But I think that in order to blast that stigma, we need to start saying, you know, well, you know, there's only so much that I can help you. Like, I want to help you more, but I reckon these people might have, you know, more of the tools or more of the ways to help equip you to dealing with the challenges that are going on in your life. And so that, you know, we've got a bunch of different supports here too. So I'll just pop them on the screen and then we can keep on chatting.
Yeah, fabulous. Cerisa has just passed on the link in our panelist chat to the documentary that she was talking about. So I'm going to paste that in the chat for us now. So you should have that if you would like to learn more about Occupation Native. I wonder if now might be a time to keep what we've just learned in mind and turn our attention a little bit to what's going on in the chat here. Nalini says, how do you help someone who actually doesn't want to be helped? Have you encountered this, Ash?
So I work at a private practice, which pretty much means that people are choosing to come in and choosing to get help. There are a lot of psychologists, clin psych, social workers who work maybe in the hospital systems who work with a lot more people who are there because they are pretty much made to be there. And this can be really difficult if there are people like that in your life. I think that, you know, there needs to be a point at which you acknowledge that you are limited. You know, we're all our own people. We have our own free will. We all can do what we want. We're all responsible for ourselves. And when people are struggling, we often feel very responsible to help them, feel very responsible to make things better for them. And I think that, if you've been following the points that we've made, that's really as much as we can do a lot of the time, to extend ourselves to other people, to be there, to hold space for them, to let them know that we can help, to try and help in the ways that we can. But once we, have reached our limits and maybe haven't been able to really get through to them, we also need to be kind and gentle to ourselves and understand that, yes, they are their own person and they are living their own life. They make their own choices.
Right. And so there are limits to what you can do as a person. And I guess it is about, finding that limit and working to it, and knowing that at a certain point you've done what you set out to do, and whether that help is received or not is not up to you. And there's so much in this universe that isn't. I want to touch again on that point that you made, Ash, about having interests outside of the work that you do in the creative industries, because I think that is so important. My story is that I was just, I've played in bands since I was little. I've managed bands. I've toured in punk bands. That was my life, and then I got a job at Triple J, and then I wanted to work more at Triple J, and like the whole way through of like finding this singular interest of music. And then the point where it really came unstuck for me was when I got what I wanted. Like I ended up being in a band that I loved. I got a full-time job at the radio station that I adored, and then my life fell apart, because what was I going to do now? I got the thing that I liked, or that I was trying to do, and the thing that I find myself often emphasizing with young musicians coming through Triple J Unearthed, which is where I spent a great deal of my time at Triple J, is, they will often ask me like, oh, how do I get my song on the radio? How do I make my song more like whatever it needs to be like to sound like it should be on the radio? And to an extent, there are things that you can do as a songwriter, as a producer, etc., to improve your craft, and that is a worthwhile pursuit. But at the same time, like, go watch some basketball, man. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, go find some other thing that you like, because it will enable your creativity in a different way, I promise you. And it will also like give you an outlet, because like, if you don't get what you want, and in my case, if you do get what you want, there's no guarantee that is actually what you're going to find fulfilling, and that is actually what's going to make you happy at the end of the day. And so I wonder if you're listening to this and you are someone who is aspiring to be in a successful band, or you want to make music, the music industry, your income. It's obviously because you're passionate about it. I implore you, please find something else to also be passionate about. My thing was going to the sauna. That's a thing that I really love.
Nice.
Yeah, being able to go and sit in a hot box for half an hour whenever is just the most important thing to me. It's all that I love doing, because I just get to be by myself, and I get to sit and not be on my phone and not worry about any of the other creative stuff that I have to do. I just get to sit and be present in the moment. And there are things like that, I guarantee, for everyone. I wonder, maybe we can go around. Brendon, what do you love outside of music?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had that exact experience. I was, as you're saying, it's a moderately successful band, and I'm on stage at a sold out show overseas, and had that moment of like, I actually, I was in such a dark place that I was like, I actually hate this.
Yeah.
What am I doing? It's been my dream to be a musician, and now I'm doing it, and I hate every second of it. So yeah, then I was like, all right, time to do something that's not music. And for me, that was painting. So
cool.
And it was nice because there's no pressure, there's no one there to be at the gig. There's no one to satisfy. It was literally just my own expression and my own want to do it. And it was, incredibly liberating. And then I actually found that, through doing it, I was like, oh, I actually enjoy it.
Yeah. Which is it's just wild. The other thing that I know you've done is have a dog.
That's a big thing. Normally she's in the frame, but she jumped away before. I mean, that's good. I mean, that's a good thing, particularly just to sort of, I think the thing I struggle with was just, you know, feeling so helpless and hopeless. It's like, where do I start? And so for me, it was just setting small incremental goals. And so getting out of bed and taking the dog for a walk, that was a goal. And then that became the routine. It's like, okay, no
Yeah.
matter what's going on, I'm always going to get up and take the dog for a walk. And so that's been a big part of structuring that routine and, you know, the cumulative list of small goals. So yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of it. I got a cat. Her name's Jeff. I always wanted a cat called Jeff. And when we got Jeff, Jeff was a girl. And she's the sweetest little thing in my life. And having that little thing to care for and to be a part of, like, whatever my life looks like now, sitting in a room in Sydney with exposed brick. In fact, I'm so confident that she caught a lizard outside. I don't know how I'm going to communicate this with all of you afterwards, but I heard this noise that was the I've caught a lizard noise, and I'm going to get outside, and I just know that I'm going to find like the little tail of a skink lizard. I'm going to chase the cat around the house, and in fact, she's at the door right now. This is uncanny. She knows she's being talked about. I want to turn our attention to this question. As a non-Indigenous person, how can we ask and talk to our Indigenous friends and how can we talk to them about if they're okay or not? And if we're not fully understanding how they must feel, some days are certainly more triggering. For example, Invasion Day. Cerisa, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah. So Invasion Day is huge because a lot of the non-Indigenous population don't actually know the meaning behind that. A lot of people are like, well, why can't we all celebrate together? Shouldn't we be united in that front? So you know, another good thing is to learn about like significant days like that. So Indigenous people do not celebrate this because of the genocide that happened on January 26th. So when that day signifies Captain Cook pretty much coming to Australia, taking over Australia, and killing a lot of the First Nations people.
Yeah.
So that's why we don't celebrate it. It's just, yeah, good to learn the history and understand the culture.
Yeah, it's broadening that depth of understanding and being able to have an informed conversation. Like I'm so much better at having conversations about depression and mental health stuff now, having been now sitting on the other side of it and still taking an antidepressant every day, but feeling comfortable, you know, and feeling like I'm in a good place, because I feel like with the gamut of mental health stuff that I've been through, you name it, I've seen it, I've felt it. It's so much easier to talk about. And I do think of it as somewhat of a badge of honor, you know, like we have an earned empathy having been through these kinds of experiences, because now you get to be in this cool little club with all the other people who have done that. And we get to talk to each other and understand each other on a level that is perhaps a little bit deeper just because of experience. And it's hard to get to that place without having seen it firsthand with a loved one or with yourself, or, you know, having had a little taste of whatever that trauma that tastes like. It's got an awful mouthfeel, I will say. It's not, I would like, don't indulge. But having a little bit of that really helps, in my opinion. Kawat says in the chat, during COVID, I've found it hard to communicate to my closest people. Most of the time, it is due to the relationships I have being stronger when in person. Are there any ideas that some of our panelists might suggest in new ways of communicating whilst in isolation? Fanny, I'm wondering if we could start with you. You live in regional New South Wales. I don't think that I can see a building nearby. Can you tell me how are you communicating with people in isolation?
Yeah, sure. I am no stranger to living like this, so it's almost something that I almost can't talk on, because it's just something that I've lived forever, and I don't know much different. But we are usually out on the road and like seeing people and fans and stuff every week, and friends and industry and stuff. So I think it's like doing stuff like this, I will put off getting on a Zoom with friends, or, you know, I'll put it off, but the minute I do it, I just get such a buzz from it. And so I think it's basically I try and schedule in like catch ups with people, and make it a priority, not just like an incidental thing, because I think the difference between living somewhere that's I don't know, more populated, you run into people more often, and so those kind of things can happen more organically. But when you're not running into people, you really have to prioritize them. And so yeah, jump on the phone, texting, because like I don't know, I know a lot of us don't like phone calls these days, and I totally relate to that. And so just chuck a text on, or like send a photo of you doing something stupid to each other, so you're just making that connection a little bit more. But yeah, it does require a little bit more effort and planning.
Ash, do you have advice?
Yeah, I think that those points that Fanny made were great. I completely agree with that too. I sometimes don't love digital chat. I much prefer being with someone, but obviously when we're sort of not really given a lot more options, it's hard, and we kind of have to make do with what we've got. So sometimes as well you can just like even play games, or have something that's going on where you can be connecting in a kind of a different way, sort of a playful way. Sharing memes is another fun one. It's like, hey, I'm thinking of you, I saw this today. So technology is amazing, and yes, I don't think that it is really a substitute for being there in person, but I think that we have to acknowledge that these times are temporary, even though they feel like they've been going on for fucking ever. That we will emerge, and once again, when we can connect with those people that we love, we'll be able to appreciate it and honor that time even more.
Fabulous. Well, look, I feel like unless there are any more questions, we might be in a position where we're pulling this panel to a close. Luke in the chat says, to find out about future Support Act events, join our mailing list. Hey, we encourage that. Thank you so much for being here on Are You OK Day, presented as a part of Support Act's On My Mind series, co-hosted by Music Victoria, Hugh Music, and APRA. Thanks again to the Australian government through the Office for the Arts. Thanks to the American Express Music Backers program. Look, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I've loved having this conversation with you. Can we quickly, if we want to find any of us on social media, where can we get you? What is the thing that you're passionate about? Let's circle the wagons all around. Fanny, where can we find you on the internet?
Probably my favorite platform would be Instagram. So jump over there. But I know all the things except for TikTok. Not great at that one.
New music on Spotify as well.
And
Cerisa,
yes.
Cerisa, how can we find you?
So my email is Cerisa, CRISA @supportact.org.au. If you have any questions about that, the support for First Nations people.
Excellent. And Ash?
You can find me on Instagram. I'm just at Ash King. I got in quick with that title. And you can also follow us at the Indigo Project, which is at _Indigo_project. If you're based in Sydney or you're keen to do Zoom sessions, you can also hit us up and have some sessions with some of our practitioners. And I am a mental health educator for Support Act. So I will remind everyone that the On My Mind series is a monthly series of free online workshops for anyone in the arts music industry. And we touch on different and juicy topics every single month. So if you enjoyed today, make sure you check out that link from Luke in the chat, and you can find out about future Support Act events and maybe join us for the next one.
And Brendon, what about you? Where can we find you?
Well, you can find me personally at BB Bad Love on Instagram. If you like the band, you can check out the Teskey Brothers on Instagram. And there's actually, we just did a podcast, which isn't exclusively about mental health, but it really goes into a detailed sort of account of what I was going through and what a few people in the band were going through during recording our second album. So if people are in that, it's called 100 Games. And yeah, we had season 1 on it. So.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay. Again, a reminder for the Support Act Wellbeing Hotline, a 24/7 service for people in the music industry to help with mental health and well-being. My name's Max Quinn. You can find me at Max Quinn in all the places that you want to find me. I think that we should pull it to a close right now. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Here's Max. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.